What if the man who crowned Manhattan with towers of glass discovered, in one reckless heartbeat on Fifth Avenue, that a little girl's cry could shatter an empire of silence? If stories of redemption, truth, and unexpected family touch your heart, please like and subscribe so you can stay with us through the very last chapter of this journey. The late autumn sun slanted low over Midtown, burnishing windows along 42nd Street and drawing long amber blades across Bryant Park. Wind threaded through the sycamores, carrying the sweet scorch of roasted chestnuts and the metallic breath of taxis idling at the curb. People poured through the crosswalks like clockwork, coats flapping, coffee cups raised, eyes glued to the green man that promised safe passage for a few measured seconds across Fifth Avenue. Richard Hale stepped out of the revolving doors of Hale Dynamics and into that tide. His navy overcoat brushed the marble column where his company's logo was etched like a verdict. To the world, Richard was the man whose signature moved markets, the architect of systems woven into airports, hospitals, trading floors. To himself, he was a well of quiet no applause could fill. Another alert buzzed his phone. Briefing in 20 minutes. Investor prep at 6. He thumbed it dark. He turned toward Fifth, welcoming the slap of wind as a living thing. Midtown's glare made him squint. A jogger's heel snapped like a metronome. A messenger bike shot past, bell pipping. The crosswalk signal flashed to walk. The crowd surged. Then the red blur. It spilled from the opposite curb, small, swift, a streak of wool and yellow ribbons. At first he thought, dog, loose leash. But the blur had pigtails, and the pigtails were chasing a limp-eared rabbit bumping across paint-striped asphalt. Wait! A woman's voice tore from the crowd, raw, frantic. A black SUV knifed into the intersection on a late yellow. Brakes screamed. Horns detonated. Someone shouted an oath that evaporated in the wind. Richard's body moved before his mind did. The old reflex, split-second decisions sharpened by years of risk, fired with terrifying clarity. He dropped his briefcase. He ran. Asphalt rushed underfoot. The girl froze mid-stride. The rabbit clutched to her chest, pupils blown wide. The SUV fishtailed. He reached her, scooped, pivoted, the vehicle's bumper shearing the hem of his coat. The rush of air slammed his ribs. He staggered, kept his feet, and vaulted the curb with the child locked to him. "Daddy?" she breathed, thin as a thread, and her head lolled against his shoulder. The word drove a spike through everything he believed about himself. He looked down. Her eyelids fluttered, then fell. The weight in his arms turned loose and worrying. She wasn't moving. "Call an ambulance," he shouted. But the people nearest him had that stunned post-siren stillness of New Yorkers who had seen too much and wanted to see no more. Richard didn't wait. He shifted her higher, felt how cold her cheek was against his jaw, and ran. Fifth Avenue tilted into a corridor of wind and light. He cut north, counting beats, counting blocks, carving the fastest line he knew. 12 blocks to the ER at NYU Langone. 12 blocks against time and traffic, and whatever had already gone wrong inside this child's small body. He ran past Library Lions, stone calm behind him, past a vendor who paused mid-scoop over a paper cone of nuts, past a tourist who lifted his phone as if filming would bless them both. The girl's stuffed rabbit thumped his chest with each stride. He had faced hostile takeovers with less fear than this, less terror than the idea that this weight might slacken forever in his arms. Glass doors yawned open to white light. "Help!" he barked, barreling into the emergency bay. Nurses moved, swift, precise. The girl was on a gurney. A mask flowered over her face. Monitors snapped to attention. An orderly reached for the rabbit, hesitated, set it beside her pillow. "What happened?" a nurse asked. "She ran into traffic," Richard said. "She fainted. She—" His voice cracked, a sound he hadn't heard in himself since boyhood. "Are you family?" He opened his mouth. Nothing came. The sliding doors hissed again. A woman stumbled in, hair blown loose from a tidy bun, apron still tied, the smell of coffee and grease clinging to her. She was breathing too fast, eyes searching, scanning, catching. "Lila!" she cried, and the name hit the room like a flare. The woman pushed past the desk, hands out, a tremble in her whole body. An orderly steadied her. She lifted her face and saw Richard. Richard. The word left her as a shiver, suddenly, impossibly, personal. In an instant, the roar of Midtown fell away. 6 years folded into the space between their eyes. Late-night walks around Bryant Park, cheap dumplings on 40th, the last argument, hard, stunned, fatal, when he had walked out believing a story he had never asked her to answer. Elena Brooks had changed, thinner in the cheeks, older in the eyes, but the grief that lived in him flared at the sight of her, not dead after all, merely buried. "What are you doing here?" she asked. It wasn't accusation. It sounded like a prayer that had lost its way. He began, and stopped. He pointed, helpless, human, at the child. The gurney swung toward a set of double doors. "Peds trauma, clear," a nurse barked. "Let's move." The team flooded through. The doors banged shut. The room became a shoreline after a wave, littered with the debris of seconds that could not be returned. Elena pressed her palm flat to the doors as if touch alone could pass through. "Lila," she whispered. And the name, 5 letters, mapped itself against time in Richard's head. Lila. A child small enough to chase a rabbit into traffic. A child old enough to call a stranger daddy. He sank onto a plastic chair. The waiting room was a geometry of endurance. Blue cushions polished to gray, a humming vending machine, a rack of dog-eared magazines nobody read. Outside the windows, the city lit itself one room at a time, like a constellation deciding to exist. Elena sat 3 chairs away, as if closeness might bruise them both. She faced forward. Her hands found each other and laced tight. "She dropped her rabbit," she said to the air. "She loves that rabbit. It rolled off the curb and—" She swallowed. "She is 5. 5. The number slotted into place with audible certainty. 6 years since Elena. 5 years old. Richard didn't say it aloud. He didn't need to. The math was a flare behind his ribs. The intercom cracked. "Pediatric trauma. O-negative blood needed. Stat." A nurse shouldered through the doors, scanning faces. "O-negative donor? Anyone?" Elena shook her head before the question finished. "I'm A-positive," she said, voice small. Richard stood. "I'm O-negative." "Sir, this way." The nurse was already moving. He followed, surrendering the world of marble lobbies and glass boardrooms for a white room that smelled of alcohol wipes and certainty. He rolled up his sleeve. The needle slid in. Crimson filled the bag. Fast. Steady. He stared at it as if he could will strength into it. He didn't speak while the blood worked its way into the future. He thought of the night he had left Elena because he trusted pictures over a person. He thought of pride and the quiet that follows it, and how silence calcifies into a life. He thought of the word daddy in a voice that had never said it to him before and had somehow named him anyway. When it was done, he pressed gauze to his arm and rose. "Get it to her," he said, voice made of iron he hadn't known was left. Back in the waiting room, Elena sat with her head in her hands. When she looked up, her eyes were rimmed red, but they were clear. "They said the transfusion's stabilizing her," she whispered. Gratitude flickered, unsteady but real. Good, he said. The word felt too small for the avalanche in his chest. They didn't speak for a while. The vending machine hummed. Somewhere, a child laughed, a wild, defiant sound, and somewhere else another cried. Manhattan pressed its cold forehead to the glass. At last, Elena asked, barely turning her head, "Why are you here, Richard?" "Because she ran, and I ran faster." He paused. "Because she said a word that broke me open." Elena stared at the far wall as if answers might be written there. "You believe the worst of me," she said, calmly, as statement, not accusation. "I did," he said. Truth, also calm. The double doors swung open. A doctor in blue scrubs stepped out, scanning for them. "Ms. Brooks, she's stable. Surgery went well. She'll be very tired. But she's strong." Elena sagged, a breath leaving her she'd held for a lifetime. "Can I see her?" "In a bit," the doctor said. "We'll let you know." When the doors closed again, the room felt less like a sentence and more like a pause. Richard stood and walked to the window that looked into the corridor beyond the ICU. Through glass and distance he caught a partial view, a small leg under a blanket patterned with balloons, a rabbit propped by a pillow. He lifted his palm to the glass and set it there, as if anchor could travel through air. Behind him, Elena's chair creaked. She didn't come closer, but her voice did. "Her name is Lila," she said. "She likes honey and warm milk and stories with trains. She thinks the lights on the bridge are fairy crowns." A breath. "She is 5. Richard's reflection hovered on the glass, his suit, his bandage, the shape of a man who had confused height with worth. He let his hand rest there a moment longer, the cool pain steady under his skin. "Lila," he said softly, to the glass and the girl beyond it, to the woman behind him, and the years between them. The name felt like a vow he had not known how to make until this day on Fifth Avenue, until a rabbit rolled, until a world he built proved smaller than a child's heartbeat. And for the first time in years, the silence inside him cracked, not with noise, but with meaning. The waiting room was built for pauses, not comfort. Blue plastic chairs, a humming vending machine, the faint drift of disinfectant that never quite masked the city clinging to every coat. Outside, Manhattan's lights snapped on one by one, a grid of small, stubborn lanterns. Richard sat with his overcoat folded across his knees. His palms still remembered the weight of the girl, the brittle lightness of her body, the rabbit's cotton ear beating his chest like a second pulse. He kept his eyes on the double doors, as if staring alone might pry them open. The doors parted. Elena stepped through, breath hitching, apron strings unspooling down her thighs. She'd scrubbed at her face, but the rush from her diner had left a sheen of hurry on her skin. A stray lock clung to her cheek. She spotted him, stopped. The kind of silence they shared had a shape, a contour worn by years, the ridge of pride, the basin of regret, the fault line that had sundered all the soft ground between them. She sat 2 chairs away. Not facing him, not quite away from him either. For a time, neither spoke. The vending machine hummed. Somewhere down the hall, a cart squeaked, a tired sound like an apology. "She dropped her rabbit," Elena said, very quietly. It rolled off the curb. "She wouldn't let it go," he replied, just as quiet. Elena's fingers worried the hem of her apron. "She's 5, she added, almost to herself. 5. The number stood up inside him and walked to the center of his mind. He did the math once and only once, and it landed like truth on stone. He gripped the edge of his coat and said nothing more. A nurse pushed through the doors, scanning the room. "We need O negative for the pediatric trauma in Bay 2. Donor now." I'm A positive, Elena said, already rising, already shaking her head. I'm O negative, Richard said, standing. The nurse nodded briskly. This way. He followed down a short corridor that smelled of alcohol swabs and determination. In the donor room, he rolled up his sleeve. The tourniquet cinched, the needle slid home, and a clear bag flexed as red settled into it with patient gravity. He watched the slow fill as if steadiness could be taught by example. The nurse glanced at his suit cuffs, at the bandage already ghosting his skin. You okay with needles? I'm okay with her living, he said. He didn't talk while the bag fattened. Words felt like drafts that might chill the small warmth he could offer. Silence felt like a blanket he could hold in place. In that silence, the old night rose, images as sharp as a reopened envelope, photos passed across a desk, messages printed in tidy blocks, a voice he trusted telling him love had been a miscalculation. He had chosen a clean break over a hard conversation. Pride had applauded. Loneliness had arrived right on time. When it was done, the nurse taped gauze into the crook of his elbow and swept the bag away with practiced speed. Thank you, she said, and it sounded less like etiquette than recognition. Back in the waiting room, Elena had turned her chair toward the doors, as if her body could shorten the distance between they are working and you can see her. He sat, and they held the kind of truce that people hold when the only enemy worth naming is on the other side of a wall. They said the transfusion is helping, she murmured at last, relief leaking out around the edges of caution. They're stabilizing her for the next hour. Richard nodded. Good. Elena glanced at his bandage. You didn't have to. I think I did, he said. They let the thin quiet return. The vending machine flicked its fluorescent tongue. A soda clanked down somewhere no one reached for it. What does she like? He asked, surprising himself with the softness in his own voice. Stories, Elena said. She likes stories with trains and bridges. She says the Brooklyn Bridge wears a crown when the lights come on. A breath. Warm milk with honey. She doesn't like loud hand dryers. She counts cracks in sidewalks and calls them rivers that forgot how to flow. He let the details settle into him, each one a small key turning in a lock he'd built against himself. Lila, he said, tasting the name. It suits her. Elena's mouth twitched at one corner, as if a smile had thought of arriving and then remembered the hour. She chose it, she said. I gave her 2 names when she was little. She kept the one that sounded like a lullaby. They drifted then into the slow recited facts of weather and work, small talk repurposed as a bridge over deep water. He learned that Elena's shifts stacked like bricks from afternoon into night, that a friend in her building watched Lila when school let out, that late fees have a way of breeding in the dark. She learned that Richard's life had become a calendar printed on glass, that assistants spoke to assistants, that sometimes the office lights felt like stars that refused to dim. Why are you here? She asked, and the question wasn't an accusation. It was a geography quiz. Point to the place that brought you back. Because she ran towards something she loved, he said, and I remembered how to run. He paused. Because when she said a word, everything I'd made to keep quiet inside me broke. Elena looked down at her hands. You didn't ask back then. I didn't, he said. I should have. You believed other people's pages over my voice. I did. He didn't try to qualify it. There are sentences that want to wear excuses. This one wanted to stand unadorned. The doors opened. A doctor stepped out, kind-eyed behind a smudge on his lenses. Ms. Brooks? She's stabilized from the transfusion and the meds are working. She'll sleep for a while. You can see her soon, one at a time. Thank you, Elena said, the two words heavy enough to bend. The doctor nodded and vanished back into the hallway's bright geometry. Elena exhaled, slow. She wiped under one eye with the side of her finger. "She'll want the rabbit," she said into the space where the doctor had been. "She doesn't sleep without it." "They set it by her pillow," Richard answered. "They knew." She nodded, as if this small kindness confirmed the larger one she could not yet name. The chair creaked when she shifted. "When she wakes, she'll ask for warm milk. She always does after a scare." "I can get it," he said, already halfway to standing. "They won't let you take it in," she said, a ghost of humor passing through her voice. "Hospital rules." He sat back. "Then I'll wait with it." The quiet reassembled itself around them, less brittle this time. He became aware of smaller things. The almost silent whisper of heating vents. The tick of the second hand on a wall clock that disagreed with his watch by 3 minutes. The way Elena's shoulders rose and fell now, not uneven but even, like a ship finding a calmer current. After a while, she asked, "Do you still walk through Bryant Park at night?" "Sometimes," he said. "Do they still string lights over the skating rink?" "They do." "She likes skating," Elena said. "Last year we held hands the whole time. We went slowly and pretended we were very fast." He pictured it so easily, small skates clattering, Elena's gloved hand steadying a wobble, the kind of laughter that warms air under breath. Something inside him tilted toward the image and held there. May I be there when you see her?" he asked. Elena's head turned. The question hung between them like a glass the room might break. He watched her weigh it. He did not reach across to steady the scale. Finally, she nodded. "One at a time," he said. "I'll go first. Then, if she's resting, you can come in and sit. Quietly." "I can be quiet," he said. "I remember," she replied. For a heartbeat, they almost smiled at the shared barb, and then let it go. A nurse appeared to motion Elena forward. She stood, smoothing her apron out of instinct more than decorum. At the threshold, she paused and glanced back. "Thank you," she said. It was the kind that means more than it says, less than it feels. He watched the doors close behind her. He set his hand on his bandage and felt the throb there, the timed reminder that something small had left him and gone where it was needed. He bought a milk from the vending machine and asked for honey at the nurse's station. A kind soul produced a packet with a conspirator's smile. He warmed the cup in a microwave that beeped softly, the kind of beep that did not alarm anyone. When Elena returned, her eyes were wet but steady. "She's sleeping," she said. They tucked the rabbit under her chin like always. "She looks like herself again." He lifted the warm cup. "For when she wakes." Elena accepted it with a nod, then gestured toward the doors. "Go," she said. "She won't know you're there." "But you can sit and listen to her breathe. Sometimes that's enough." He entered the corridor, the lights gentler than they had seemed from the other side. Through the glass, he saw a small figure under a ballooned blanket, the rabbit's ear folded forward like a hand shading its eyes. He did not touch the pain this time. He sat in the single chair by the wall and let the hush wrap him like a coat he hadn't realized he'd been cold without. Machines kept their distance, steady and unintrusive. In their measured rhythm, he heard not the clamor of alarms, but a metronome for beginnings. Breath, and another, and another. He let his own breathing match it. He felt the ache in his arm and welcomed it. Through the reflection, he could make out his own face, less armored in glass than it had been a few hours ago. He didn't say the words that crowded his chest. He held them still, the way one holds a sleeping child, carefully, without need to be heard. On the far side of the room, someone drew a curtain. A nurse adjusted a line. Footsteps hushed by rubber soles drifted past. He stayed, counting breaths until numbers became something softer, like prayer. When he finally stood to leave the glass for the chair outside, he paused and bowed his head, a gesture not to any god he knew, but to the fragile, ordinary miracle of a small chest rising and falling. Then he stepped back into the waiting room, where Elena sat with the warm milk in both hands, and the city beyond the windows held steady, lights upon lights, a patient constellation learning how to be whole. The night air in Manhattan pressed heavy against the hospital windows, thick with sirens and streetlight haze. Inside, the pediatric wing hummed with steady rhythms, the shuffle of nurses, the muted beeps of monitors, the faint squeak of a cleaning cart rounding a corner. For Richard, time had slowed to a crawl measured only by the throb in his bandaged arm and the fragile breaths of a little girl who had slipped, unknowingly, into the center of his world. He stood outside the ICU bay where Lila lay, a pane of glass separating him from the small figure beneath a balloon-patterned blanket. Her rabbit nestled under her chin, its threadbare ear drooping like a tired sentinel. She looked impossibly small, swallowed by hospital sheets, but her chest rose and fell with the rhythm of defiance, an act of will against everything that had tried to take her. Richard pressed his palm lightly to the glass. It wasn't much, but it was contact. In the reflection, his own face looked back. Sharp suit softened by fatigue, jaw taut, eyes ringed with something more than exhaustion. For the first time in years, he didn't see the CEO who closed billion-dollar deals. He saw a man who might have lost something before he ever knew it belonged to him. Behind him, Elena's voice came, low and weary. "She's strong. Stronger than me sometimes." He turned. She was leaning against the wall, arms folded across her apron still marked with faint stains of the diner. She hadn't changed clothes, hadn't rested. Her whole body seemed to hum with maternal vigilance. A woman wired to move at the first call of her child's name. Richard cleared his throat. "The doctor said the transfusion helped." "Yes," Elena replied softly. "They say she'll recover, but there'll be more tests, more bills." She bit her lip, then shook her head. "Not that it matters. She's breathing. That's enough." The words landed between them, simple and absolute. He could feel her exhaustion, but beneath it, pride held her upright. Richard hesitated. He could have stayed silent, let the glass and the machines speak for him. But questions, old, festering, pushed to the surface. "She's 5, he said quietly. Elena's eyes flicked to his, then away. "Yes, 5. He inhaled through his nose. 5 years old. And we—" His voice caught. "We ended 6 years ago." Elena didn't answer. The silence stretched until Richard filled it, his words spilling faster, sharper. "I see her face, Elena. I see her hands. I know what I looked like at that age. I know how my mother said my hair curled over my ear the same way hers does now." His voice softened, trembling under its own weight. "Bloodlines don't lie." Elena's shoulders stiffened, but she didn't turn. Her gaze locked on the glass, on the child beyond it. "Bloodlines may not lie," she whispered. "But people do." The words cut. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Then tell me, was I lied to?" Her eyes brimmed, but she blinked the tears back before they could fall. "You left, Richard. You didn't ask. You believed what you were shown and walked away." His chest tightened. Images clawed at him. The night he ended it. The photographs slid across his desk. The text messages printed out by someone he trusted. Elena with another man. A hotel room number. Evidence tidy, damning, irrefutable. Or so he'd thought. He had taken the pages as gospel and built his life on their ashes. Now, standing here, the certainty rotted. The memory curdled. What if those pages were nothing but poison in a pretty envelope? I thought... He stopped. The words, "I thought you betrayed me," caught in his throat, tasted hollow now. He exhaled, shoulders heavy. I thought I was protecting myself. Elena let out a brittle laugh, the sound closer to breaking than humor. Protecting yourself? You weren't the only one at risk. I lost everything that night. Not just you. She drew a sharp breath. And she lost her father before she even knew his name. The truth burned. Richard pressed a hand to the cool glass. Lila stirred in her sleep, the rabbit slipping closer to her lips. His throat tightened at the sight. I didn't know, he whispered. If she is mine... Elena's head snapped toward him. If? He faltered. She looks like me, Elena. She has my blood. Tonight proved that. I'm not blind. Elena closed her eyes. For a long moment she stood very still, shoulders rising and falling in silent battle. Then she opened them and faced him squarely. Yes, she's yours. The words were bare, stripped of ornament, a confession and a charge all at once. Richard staggered back a half step, as if the ground had shifted beneath him. His pulse roared in his ears. Every wall he'd built, around grief, around betrayal, around himself, cracked under the weight of that simple admission. She deserved a father, Elena said, voice low and fierce. But when you walked away, I told myself I'd raise her without bitterness. I told myself I wouldn't beg a man who chose pride over trust. Her chin trembled, but she steadied it. So I raised her alone. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, to explain how convincing the evidence had been. But the words withered on his tongue. Because the truth was, she was right. He hadn't asked. He hadn't trusted. He had abandoned love at the first sign of smoke, never thinking to search for the fire setter. Through the glass, Lila shifted again, murmuring in her sleep. Her lips parted, and the faintest sound escaped, a dream word, unintelligible but achingly human. Richard leaned closer, eyes blurring. His daughter. His own blood beating outside him, vulnerable and alive. He swallowed hard. I want to be there for her. I don't care what it costs me. I want to know her. Elena studied him, eyes red-rimmed, mouth set. Wanting isn't enough, Richard. She's not a deal you can sign, not a company you can absorb. She's a child, my child. And if you walk in, you'd better stay. Because I won't let her suffer from someone else's half measures. He met her gaze without flinching. I stayed in that crosswalk, Elena. I'll stay here. For a long time, she didn't answer. Then, finally, she looked back at the window, at the girl who tethered them both. We'll see, she said. Richard sank into the chair beside her. The minutes ticked by, measured in the hush of ventilators and the beat of a fragile heart. He thought of every tower he'd built, every ledger he'd balanced, every victory that had felt hollow. None of it compared to the rise and fall of that small chest, steadying itself against the dark. Bloodlines don't lie. And this truth, this undeniable, irrevocable truth, had found him at last. The city outside never stopped moving, but inside NYU Langone, time folded into a slower current. The waiting room smelled of burnt coffee and antiseptic, its harsh lights giving no hint that dawn had already crept across Manhattan. Richard sat with his elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the floor tiles, replaying Elena's words over and over. She's yours. No quarterly report had ever hit him with such precision. No hostile takeover had ever stripped him so bare. For years, he had measured his worth in rising stock tickers, in square footage of glass towers carrying his name. Now, With just 3 words, Elena had toppled everything he thought he knew. The door hissed open and Elena returned from Lila's bedside. Her face was pale but softer, steadied by the sight of her daughter breathing on her own. She didn't sit right away. She stood across from him, arms crossed tightly over her apron. "You should rest," Richard said. His voice felt foreign, unsteady. "So should you," she replied. Silence fell again. A janitor pushed his cart down the hall, the squeak of wheels stretching the moment. Finally, Richard raised his head. "Elena," he began carefully. "That night, 6 years ago, I walked away because of what I was shown. Photos, messages, it all looked irrefutable." He exhaled sharply. "But I never asked you. I never gave you the chance to explain." Her jaw tightened. "You believed what you wanted to believe. That's the truth." He shook his head. "No, I believed what someone wanted me to believe. And I need to know who." Her eyes flicked to his, wary but burning. "Why now?" "Because our daughter deserves to know," he said, the word "our" landing like a stone in still water. "If someone destroyed us with lies, then Lila has lived 5 years without her father because of them." "That's not just betrayal, it's theft. I won't let it stand." Elena's arms dropped to her sides. Her breath trembled. "You don't know what you're asking." "Then tell me." She hesitated, gaze dropping to the linoleum. "I never had proof," she whispered. "But I suspected. A colleague of yours. Someone close. She came to me once after you left. She told me I should disappear. That you'd never believe me anyway." Richard's pulse kicked. A colleague. A woman. Someone close. He thought of the boardroom, the offices lined with glass and chrome, the faces that had stayed at his side as he rose higher, one face in particular. "Elena," he pressed. "Who?" Her lips trembled, then stilled. "Victoria Lane," she said. The name detonated inside him. Victoria, his COO, the second most powerful voice at Hale Dynamics, the woman he'd trusted with contracts, mergers, the very spine of the company. He had leaned on her judgment countless times. And now, to hear this, Richard surged to his feet, pacing once across the narrow room. "If she fabricated those messages, if she orchestrated this—" He stopped, fists clenched. "She's still in power, still shaping every decision I sign. God." He pressed a hand to his temple. Elena's voice was low, edged with hurt. "You chose her word over mine." He turned sharply, regret heavy in his eyes. "I chose evidence she planted. That's different, that's worse." He paused, forcing himself to breathe. "But it means we can prove it. Emails, bank transfers, access logs, cameras. If she paid someone to forge those messages, the trail exists. And I'll find it." Elena searched his face. For years, she had lived without this man's promises. Now his voice carried steel she hadn't heard before. Steel not for the boardroom, but for her, for Lila. She wanted to believe it, but doubt coiled tight. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why fight now? You've already built your empire. What good is digging up the past?" Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Because the past isn't buried if it still owns us. Because Lila deserves truth, not shadows. And because I can't sit here, knowing I abandoned you both and not tear apart every lie that made it happen." The conviction in his tone startled even him. For years he had been a man of contracts and negotiations, weighing profit against risk. But this was different. This wasn't about shareholders. This was about blood. Elena turned away, arms wrapping around herself as if holding her heart together. If you go after her, she'll come after you. You know that. Then let her try, Richard said. I've lost more in silence than I ever will in a fight. The glass door to Lila's room slid open. A nurse adjusted the IV line, then glanced back at the parents lingering outside. She's stable, the nurse said gently. You can sit with her, one at a time. Elena nodded, wiping quickly at her eyes. Go, she whispered to Richard. He hesitated, then stepped into the room. The hiss of machines softened, leaving only the sound of his daughter's breathing. He lowered himself into the chair by her bed, taking in the tiny rise and fall of her chest, the rabbit tucked under her chin. For a long time he just sat there, his hand resting on the bed rail, not touching, but close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her. His throat burned. She's mine. And she almost never knew me. He looked at the monitors, the steady green line, the blip of life refusing to be stolen. Then he whispered. Not a vow to the world, not a speech for headlines, but a promise spoken only to the small, sleeping girl who had saved him from himself. I'll find the truth, Richard murmured. And when you wake up, Lila, I'll be here. Always. Outside, Elena leaned against the glass, watching through blurred eyes. And somewhere deep inside both of them, the cracks in the past began to open. Not to destroy, but to finally let the light in. The hum of the city outside the hospital never reached the diner on 10th Avenue where Elena worked double shifts. Its neon sign flickered, buzzing like a tired insect, while inside the scent of burnt coffee and fryer oil clung to the vinyl booths. She had hated this place once, hated the clatter of plates and the cruel math of tips against rent. But it had kept her and Lila alive. And it was here, years ago, that Victoria Lane had walked through the door. Elena remembered it with painful clarity. She had been wiping down the counter, apron streaked with grease when the bell above the door chimed. Victoria entered as though she owned the room. Immaculate suit, sharp heels, every inch the queen of corporate Manhattan. Customers glanced up, sensing her authority, before quickly returning to their meals. Elena Brooks, Victoria had said smoothly, sliding into a booth without asking. We need to talk. Elena froze, rag still in her hand. I'm working. Then take 5 minutes, for your own good. She remembered the chill that spread through her. She had slid into the booth, wary, while Victoria leaned forward, manicured nails tapping against the formica. You're pregnant, Victoria said bluntly. Elena's breath caught. How? I know everything that touches Richard, and I'm here to save him from a mistake. Elena's stomach tightened. He deserves to know. No. Victoria's eyes had glinted, cold as steel. He deserves freedom. You'll never be more than a waitress in a cheap uniform. Do you think that's what Richard Hale needs? Do you think that's what Hale Dynamics needs? Elena had tried to rise, but Victoria's words held her still. You'll disappear quietly, Victoria continued, her voice dropping to a venomous calm. Raise your child far from him. If you stay, if you try to force your way back into his life, I can make calls. One word, and this diner won't hire you again. Neither will anyone else. You'll find doors closed, rent unpaid, bills piling up until you drown. Elena had clenched her fists under the table, nails digging into her palms. You would ruin me. Victoria had smiled faintly. For him? In a heartbeat. That was the last time Elena saw her, and the reason she never called Richard. Now, sitting in the hospital corridor, Elena whispered the memory to Richard, each word tasting of old fear. He listened in silence, jaw tightening with every sentence. When she finished, her hands trembled in her lap. Richard rose, pacing a tight line across the linoleum. She didn't just forge evidence. She hunted you, threatened you, drove you into silence. His voice sharpened. That wasn't ambition. That was war. Elena looked up at him, her voice raw. And I fought it by myself while you believed her. Richard stopped, turning back. His chest burned with shame, but beneath it a new fire grew. Not anymore. I'll drag her lies into the light. Elena's eyes searched his, still cautious. If you push her, she'll strike back. She's had 6 years to bury her tracks. Then I'll dig deeper, Richard said. Email archives, wire transfers, security footage. I'll hire forensic auditors if I must. She thinks the boardroom makes her untouchable, but I built Hale Dynamics brick by brick. If she poisoned it, I'll tear every wall down until she's exposed. Elena studied him, her expression unreadable. And what if it cost you everything? The company, the empire, everything you've spent your life building? Richard glanced through the glass at the sleeping child in the ICU. His voice softened, but his eyes held iron. Then let it cost me. Towers of glass can fall. She can't. The silence between them shifted, still fragile, but carrying something new. Not promises, not excuses. Resolve. For the first time, Elena believed he wasn't just talking as a CEO. He was talking as a father. The rain came down in silver streaks over Midtown, blurring the glass facades of Hale Dynamics' headquarters. Richard Hale stood in the back of his car outside the revolving doors, his reflection fractured in the window pane. His driver asked if he needed an umbrella, but Richard shook his head. The storm was fitting. Tonight, he would walk into a different kind of storm. Inside, the building hummed with its usual urgency. Suits brushed past each other. Interns carried coffee trays. Screens glowed with stock updates. But there was a shift in the air. Rumors had spread about the emergency board session called by Richard himself. He rode the elevator to the top floor. Each chime felt like a countdown. By the time the doors opened, he was steel. The conference room stretched wide and sleek, walls of glass revealing the skyline drowned in rain. The board of directors sat around the mahogany table, restless, their murmurs rising like static. At the far end, Victoria Lane stood poised in a tailored navy suit, her folder of quarterly projections resting neatly in front of her. She looked like calm incarnate, as if the empire were hers alone to command. "Richard," she said with measured ease as he entered, "we're eager to hear why you summoned us at such short notice." Richard didn't sit. He remained standing at the head of the table, one hand braced against the polished wood. "Because we've been living with a lie for 6 years, and it ends tonight." The room shifted, uneasy. Victoria's brow arched, her smile thin. "A lie?" "Yes." Richard signaled to his assistant, who entered with a slim laptop. The screen at the far end of the room flickered to life. 6 years ago, I ended a relationship because I believed fabricated evidence, photographs, messages. They weren't real. They were planted. Richard's voice cut through the air. And they were planted by you, Victoria. Gasps broke the silence. Several board members turned sharply toward her. Victoria didn't flinch. "That's a dangerous accusation. Do you have anything besides bitterness to support it?" Richard tapped the table once. The screen lit up with evidence. Bank transfers traced from Victoria's personal accounts to a small data consultancy in Queens. Email logs, pulled from archived servers, showing her instructions to create falsified messages. Security footage from the consultancy's office, time-stamped nights she claimed to be in meetings. The proof scrolled in cold precision, each line another blade. Mr. Harlan, one of the senior directors, leaned forward, frowning. "Is this authenticated?" "Yes," Richard said firmly. "By an independent forensic firm. Every dollar. every file, every timestamp. For the first time, Victoria's mask cracked. Her smile faltered, then sharpened into defiance. And what if I did? You were blind with sentiment. I freed you to become the man this company needed. Look around. Hale Dynamics has tripled its valuation under my watch. Investors don't care about your waitress, sweetheart, or a child. They care about results. Her words rippled through the room like poison, but Richard didn't flinch. He leaned closer, his voice low and cutting. You didn't free me. You stole from me. You stole 6 years with my daughter, and you poisoned this company with deceit. The room erupted into murmurs. The chairman raised his hand. Enough. Ms. Lane, given the severity of this evidence, we have no choice. Effective immediately, you are removed from your position as COO. Victoria's eyes flashed, her composure cracking into fury. You think you can run this empire without me? You'll collapse without my hand on the wheel. Richard straightened, his voice unwavering. Then let it collapse. I'd rather watch towers of glass fall than let them stand on lies. The chairman cleared his throat. Until a replacement is appointed, we'll install an interim COO. Additionally, I'm ordering a full independent audit of operations. This company will be rebuilt on truth. Victoria's face drained of color. She gathered her folder with trembling fingers, her heels striking sharp against the marble as 2 security officers approached. At the doorway, she turned back, eyes burning into Richard. You'll regret this. Richard met her gaze, calm as stone. No, Victoria. I regret the years I trusted you. The doors shut behind her, sealing the storm outside with the one inside. When the room settled, the chairman spoke again. Richard, what you've done tonight was dangerous. Investors will rattle. The press will swarm. Richard nodded once. So be it. We'll tell them the truth. Integrity isn't a liability. It's the foundation. The directors exchanged wary glances but offered no further protest. One by one they filed out, leaving Richard alone in the cavernous room. He stood at the window, rain streaking down the glass, the city sprawling below. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of Hale Dynamics lift. The empire could survive without Victoria, but without Elena and Lila, there was nothing left worth saving. He turned, gathered his coat, and walked out, not back to Midtown's boardrooms, but to a hospital where his daughter's laughter mattered more than any stock ticker ever would. The pediatric ward was quiet, lit by the soft glow of night shift lamps. Outside the window, Manhattan hummed, but here, on the 6th floor of NYU Langone, the world slowed to the pace of a child's breathing. Richard Hale eased open the door to Lila's room. Elena was dozing in the corner chair, arms folded, exhaustion written in the tilt of her head. Lila lay tucked into her hospital bed, the stuffed rabbit snug against her chest. Her eyelids fluttered, half dreaming. Richard stepped closer, his heart pounding in a way no boardroom had ever caused. He bent to adjust the blanket, tucking it carefully beneath her chin. She stirred, eyes blinking open, her gaze fixed on him. "You're still here," she whispered. "I told you I wouldn't leave," he said softly. Her small hand emerged from under the blanket, fingers trembling as they reached for his. Richard hesitated only a moment before taking it gently. Her skin was warm now, no longer ice-cold like the night on Fifth Avenue. She studied his face with a seriousness far older than her 5 years. "You're the one who saved me." "Yes," Richard admitted. His voice caught. "But it wasn't just saving you. It was finding you." She tilted her head. "Mommy said Daddy wasn't here." Richard swallowed hard. This was the moment. No board vote, no press release, just truth, raw and fragile. He bent closer, lowering his voice. Your mommy was right. I wasn't here. I should have been. But I am now. Because I'm your daddy, Lila. For a heartbeat, silence hung between them. Then her eyes widened. Really? Really, Richard whispered, tears pricking his eyes. I'm your daddy. She exhaled a tiny sigh of relief, as if some secret part of her had always known. She pressed his hand closer, her voice trembling but steady. I knew it. When you carried me, I felt it. Richard bowed his head, overcome. For years he had carried towers of glass and the weight of billions, yet nothing compared to the weight of his daughter's trust. Elena stirred awake in the corner, blinking against the dim light. She froze at the sight, her daughter's small hand wrapped tightly around Richard's. She rose slowly, emotions flickering across her face. Lila turned toward her mother. Mommy, he's my daddy. The words hit Elena like a bell tolling in the still night. She pressed her lips together, tears welling. Richard looked at her, his own expression pleading. Not for forgiveness, not yet, but for the chance to stand in truth at last. I don't want to go, Lila murmured, half asleep now. Don't let go, Daddy. I won't, Richard said. This time it wasn't a vow flung into the air. It was simple action. He sat down beside her bed, his hand never leaving hers. He reached with his free hand to buzz the nurse's call button when Lila coughed, then poured water into the plastic cup and helped her sip. When her blanket slipped, he fixed it. And when she whimpered from a dream, he began telling her a story, halting at first, then softer, steadier, about a rabbit who found its way home after being lost in the city. By the time her breathing slowed into sleep, his voice broke. He kissed her forehead gently. You'll never be lost again. Elena stood near the doorway, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She had heard every word. For the first time, she didn't see Richard Hale, the CEO, the man who had once abandoned her. She saw a father, awkward, undone, but real. As she watched him sit through the night, his head finally resting against the edge of the bed, her hand instinctively covered her heart. Something fragile, long buried, stirred again. The hospital had begun to feel like a second home. Days blurred into nights, broken only by the quiet beep of monitors and the soft shuffle of nurses' shoes. Richard Hale, once the man whose calendar was carved into 15-minute blocks, now measured time by his daughter's breaths and the fragile curve of her smile. He kept his phone on silent. The board could wait. Investors could wait. Hale Dynamics could wait. One evening, Elena returned from a quick shower to find Richard seated at Lila's bedside, sleeves rolled, tie abandoned. On the tray table between them sat a small wooden chessboard, its pieces mismatched from the hospital gift shop. You taught her? Elena asked, surprised. She taught me, Richard replied with a faint smile. She's got a sharper mind than I ever had at her age. Lila giggled, nudging her knight across the board. Check. Richard feigned shock. Already? He leaned forward, exaggerating his struggle as he tried to protect his king. Lila's laughter filled the sterile room bright and unrestrained, chasing shadows from the corners. Elena leaned against the doorway, arms crossed but lips curved. She had raised Lila alone, through nights of fever and mornings of empty cupboards. To see her daughter laugh like this, with him, was both healing and terrifying. Later that night, after Lila had drifted to sleep, a nurse peeked in. Mr. Hale, there's a call waiting for you at the front desk. Urgent, from your office. Richard shook his head. "Tell them I'm unavailable." The nurse hesitated. "They said it's about a board decision." "Unavailable," Richard repeated gently, eyes never leaving his daughter. Elena watched in silence. No speeches, no grand vows, just one small action, choosing this room over the empire outside. For the first time, she began to believe. The next morning, Lila woke coughing. Richard was already there, rising instantly to pour water, guiding the straw to her lips with steady hands. Elena reached for the call button, but Richard had already pressed it, summoning the nurse before she asked. "I've got her," he said simply. And he did. When Elena stepped out to fetch breakfast, she returned to find Richard asleep in the chair, chin resting on his chest. Lila had tugged his hand into the bed, clutching it even in dreams. The sight struck Elena hard. Richard was a man who once commanded towers of glass, now anchored by the tiny grip of a 5-year-old. She set the coffee down quietly, her eyes softening. Trust didn't heal overnight, but something had begun. Not words, not promises, actions. And sometimes, it was as simple as a man who stayed when no one asked him to. Madison Square Garden vibrated with life. Spotlights swept over a crowd gathered not for an NBA showdown, but for a charity basketball game to raise funds for pediatric trauma care. Children in jerseys darted across the court for the opening exhibition, their laughter amplified by 20,000 cheering voices. Richard Hale stood just inside the tunnel, Elena at his side, Lila perched on her hip with her rabbit clutched tightly. For once, he wasn't thinking of stock prices or quarterly margins. He was thinking of how to hold steady under brighter lights than any boardroom could offer. "You don't have to speak," Elena whispered, her voice taut. "Yes," Richard replied, his gaze fixed on the court. "I do." When the announcer called his name, the crowd roared. Richard stepped onto the hardwood, Elena and Lila walking with him. Reporters rushed the sidelines, lenses flashing, but he raised a hand for quiet. He took the microphone at center court, his voice steady. "I've stood in front of investors and politicians. I've spoken about profits, technology, and power. But none of it matters compared to what I almost lost." The arena hushed. Richard turned toward Elena, his eyes unguarded. "6 years ago, I believed lies and walked away from the woman who gave me her heart. Elena Brooks, I failed you. And yet, you raised the most extraordinary little girl with courage I can never repay." Gasps rippled through the audience as cameras panned to Elena, her cheeks flushed with shock. She clutched Lila closer, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. Then Richard knelt, microphone lowered to his daughter's height. "And you, Lila, the night I carried you from traffic, you saved me more than I saved you. You called me daddy, and you were right. I am your father, and I will never let go again." The crowd erupted, not with polite applause, but with thunder, stomping and cheers. Families in the stands wept openly, strangers moved by the rawness of it. Richard rose, his voice rising with the roar. "Tonight, this event raises funds to heal children in crisis. But for me, it's also a promise. To build my life not on towers of glass, but on family. Elena and Lila are my home, my purpose, my legacy." Lila tugged his sleeve, whispering into the microphone he still held. "We're really a family now?" Richard scooped her up, holding her close. "Yes, sweetheart. We are." The ovations swelled until the rafters shook. Reporters shouted about Hale Dynamics, about Wall Street fallout, but Richard only smiled, taking Elena's hand as he carried Lila off the court. For once, the headlines didn't matter. What mattered was the small heartbeat against his chest and the woman walking beside him, his family. Finally, whole. Brooklyn smelled of rain that evening. the kind that clung to brick stoops and glistened on old fire escapes. From their third-floor walk-up, Richard could see the golden sweep of the Brooklyn Bridge glowing against the night, its cables strung like harp strings across the East River. The city beyond pulsed with its usual hunger, but here, inside this modest apartment, time had finally learned to breathe. Dinner was nothing grand, just spaghetti, bread warmed in the oven, and salad Elena had tossed together from the corner market. Richard twirled his fork clumsily, earning a giggle from Lila as sauce smeared across his shirt cuff. He laughed, unbothered. "I can negotiate billion-dollar mergers," he said, "but apparently spaghetti defeats me." "Mommy's better at it," Lila teased, eyes bright. "She always has been," Richard replied, looking across the table at Elena. The candle on the table flickered, its flame painting her face in soft light. For a moment, Elena allowed herself to smile without caution. After dinner, Richard insisted on washing dishes. He rolled his sleeves high, clumsy with the sponge but stubborn. Elena leaned against the counter, watching as suds dripped onto the floor. "Careful," she said, amused. He glanced over his shoulder. "I built towers of glass. I think I can handle plates." One slipped, clattering harmlessly in the sink. They both burst out laughing, an unguarded sound that belonged less to the CEO of Hale Dynamics and more to the man Elena had once loved. Later, Lila dragged a battered board game from the shelf. The three of them sat cross-legged on the worn rug, dice tumbling across the cardboard, laughter echoing off cracked plaster walls. No investors, no press, no shadows of betrayal, just the soft joy of ordinary life. When Lila finally grew drowsy, she crawled into Richard's lap, rabbit tucked under her arm. "Daddy, carry me," she mumbled. Richard lifted her gently, settling her into her small bed by the window. He brushed her hair back, kissed her forehead. "Good night, sweetheart." Her eyes fluttered closed, her breathing even. He lingered, watching, until Elena touched his arm. They stepped out onto the small balcony. The bridge glowed in the distance, a ribbon of gold threading Manhattan to Brooklyn. Richard slipped his hand into Elena's. She didn't pull away. "I've made promises before," he said quietly. "But this time, I'll let my days speak for me. One dinner, one bedtime story, one morning at a time." Elena's eyes shimmered, cautious but soft. "I've forgiven you. But trust takes time." Richard nodded. "Then I'll be here, however long it takes." Together they stood, the hum of the city below them, the quiet of their daughter's sleep behind them. For the first time, Richard felt no hunger for towers of glass or headlines carved in ink. What he held now, in Elena's hand and in Lila's heartbeat, was the only legacy worth leaving. And as the bridge lights burned against the Brooklyn night, their family, broken, mended, reborn, glowed quietly too. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of Richard, Elena, and Lila's journey. A story of truth, forgiveness, and family found again. If this touched your heart, please consider subscribing to join us for more stories of hope and healing.